1. I work as a project manager for a precast concrete company. Construction contractors will contact us with plan sets, and we will fabricate their storm drainage inlets and manholes in our shop, then ship them to the contractor's job site, where they set the concrete in the ground, connect all the pipes, and bury it all. We bill out each structure, complete drainage inlet or manhole as it ships. Now, on these sorts of jobs, everyone agrees to pricing terms up front. Only catch is that plans can change halfway through the job, resulting in change orders, shifts of scope, etc. Usually the pricing is done in a way to simplify everything. Rather than putting an individual price on each structure, they are grouped by average height and type. This can create issues when billing out the structures later, as the accounts receivable people can misbill a shorter structure at the taller price and vice versa. This is really only an issue for larger jobs that have dozens of structures, as keeping track of everything can become overwhelming. So a few years ago, I started at this job, and the first contract I manage is a very large one consisting of over 100 structures, and was worth about $400,000. For context, most other contracts I manage have 30 structures or less on them, and usually hover around $100,000. Anyway, it takes over a year and many change orders to get this contract completed. Then come the billing disputes. It seems like this contractor had bid lower than they could actually manage on this contract, so afterward, they were trying to make up as much money as possible. They sent over a short list of mislabeled structures, some dating back over a year prior, and requested a billing credit of around $4,000 to compensate for the difference in price. Looking at the list and double-checking their math, it all checked out, and I authorized a credit. The next week, they reached out again for a complete list of structures, invoices, and shipping tickets. Their claim was that we had shorted them on a number of structures from the original purchase agreement, as well as they claimed to have found more misbilled structures. They already had all this documentation, as we sent it to the contractors at every stage of the project, so I was fairly annoyed by their request. Well, after a few conversations with this contractor that go nowhere, I concede and cancel work on all my other projects for the next few days, so that I can gather up all the information they've requested. Emails, text messages, delivery tickets, and invoices, stretching back over a year, all printed out on my desk. I put it all into a single spreadsheet. I listed out each category of structure, modeled after the original purchase agreement, added in fields for all the relevant change orders, and listed each structure on this job. I listed the structure ID, the sheet numbers it appeared on in the plan set, the structure height, the correct billing category, the price based on original purchase agreement, the invoice number, the price on the invoice, the delivery date, the shipping ticket number, and any relevant notes regarding that particular structure. It took me days to sort through all the data, track down all the supporting emails for each change, and get it all organized into this single spreadsheet. I even had a second sheet dedicated to tracking change orders, which I referenced from the main sheet. It was glorious, and also enlightening. There were many instances where my company had billed the incorrect price for a structure, even more than this contractor had indicated. But most were billing them at a lower price for a shorter structure than the correct price for taller ones. I also found a few structures that were built and delivered but were never billed out. It all came down to the bottom line, where it was revealed that through all the change orders, the total contract value had decreased about $20,000. So good for them on saving money. But the cherry on my sundae was looking at the final balances. In the end, it turned out the contractor owed us over $15,000, not including that $4,000 credit we had sent them earlier. I sent this magnificent spreadsheet off to the contractor along with an invoice for $19,000. I never heard back from them again, but my AR folks let me know when their last check cleared. Had they done this analysis themselves with the documents they already have? They could have seen how good a deal they were getting and saved thousands. I know my company wouldn't have noticed had they not asked for me to do the analysis. I still pull out that spreadsheet and look at it on occasion. Gotta appreciate the little victories in life. 2. So this happened a few years ago. I was doing my doctoral studies in a research lab at the time. Since this is an academic setting, things run a bit differently from a regular work setting, but not by much. We got a new postdoc from abroad. This guy, Bob, who at first seemed really nice. This was his second round of postdoc. To those who don't know, after completing your doctoral studies, you can continue working in research labs while having your paycheck comes from periodic grants rather than having it come from an institution. It's basically like a scholarship rather than a paycheck, and usually you go on one round of postdoc at a lab before trying to get a tenure, a permanent head of lab position, at a research institution. While it is not uncommon to do more than one round, it does mean that you were not good enough and lucky enough to get a tenure. So Bob comes to the lab and begins telling us how successful he was at his previous lab, how his boss liked him a lot, how everyone came to him asking for advice and guidance, how knowledgeable he is in all things concerning our field, how he had his own office, how his boss would invite him to dinner and pay for him, etc. Well, we were all a skeptical bunch who live in a country where respect is something you earn and not entitled to, and decorum is non-existent. I think that in my country, the only person anyone calls Mr. is the Prime Minister, and even that is only to his face. So you get how unimpressed we were by this talk, and how little effect it had on us. A quick chat with friends of friends from his former institute revealed that this guy was embellishing the truth quite a bit. Yes, he had his own room, but only because most students had. Yes, the boss took him to dinner and paid for it, together with the rest of the lab. You get the idea. I, in particular, hated Bob as he got me into an uncomfortable position with the boss. The boss was doing a sabbatical year abroad, and I continued working as usual in his absence. I'm saying that I continued because many people took advantage of the boss's absence to come late and leave early. Myself, the lab manager, and another research associate were the only ones whose attendance didn't really change. Like I said, this is academia, so people could still get paid even if they didn't come in as usual. But no one abused this system more than Bob. The guy was a no-show for most of a year. However, he managed to get away with it by claiming that he was coming in during the weekend since he liked to work when no one was around and he didn't need to wait in line to use some service or utility. Only problem is, I had a ton of work to do and no life to live, so I would also come in on the weekends. And not for a little bit, no. I had a lengthy, repetitive procedure I needed to carry out that I simply had no time for during normal workdays. And so the boss would call me to verify if Bob was coming in the weekends, as he was saying, which I hated. I was once outcasted due to similar circumstances in high school, which caused me a lot of mental stress. I knew that I am a terrible liar and couldn't lie to the boss, but also knew that the truth would put me on a path to conflict with Bob. I didn't like being in that position, and once Bob realized that I was telling on him to the boss, he got pissed and called me a liar, claiming that I was obviously not in while he was, even though I would spend 11 to 6 at the lab. It didn't matter that my lab mates and lab manager believed me. What mattered more was the situation I was in, which would have been avoided had Bob bothered to come in at least once a week. The boss didn't take anyone's side and was pretty oblivious to Bob calling me a liar. Well, Bob was not only a lazy liar, but he was also an incompetent lazy liar. Dude didn't know how to do stuff that our undergrad workers did. And that put me in a bind when I came to distribute tasks in the lab. Since this is academia, and our labs didn't have a lot of money, we tended to do most of the prep work, like preparing equipment and mixing chemicals, etc., in-house rather than outsource it. And I was in charge of distributing these different tasks between the lab members. Usually, I would task someone with something based on their ability to carry out said task. For example, I would give easier things to the new people in the lab, or the less knowledgeable ones, while things that required precision or care I'd give to the seasoned researchers. And usually things that were simple to do were repetitive, boring, or tedious processes that required more brawn than brain. If they were not, they usually required interaction with faculty maintenance crew, and this required one to speak the local language, which Bob obviously didn't. We were 5 people, me and Bob, and we had 16 tasks in the lab. I divided the tasks between all the people, 2 per person, and was left with 6. 2 were mine ever since I had entered the lab, and I was reluctant to give them away as they were somewhat sensitive and needed to be carried out with care. That left 4. All were annoying, time-consuming, sweat-inducing tasks. Now you can probably see where this is going, but still bear with me. I, of course, could have been the bigger person and took on an additional task. But why would I? In terms of rank, lazy, unreliable Bob outranked me, which he constantly reminded me of. It didn't matter that he was so unreliable that task distribution was delegated to someone his junior. All that mattered to him was that he was my senior. So I gave all 4 remaining tasks to Bob. We had a meeting with our boss via Skype, during which I announced the new distribution of tasks. When I got to Bob, I mentioned his 4 tasks, and of course, he was furious. He loudly demanded to know why everyone got 2 tasks, but he got 4. So I got a big smile on and said, "Why, just the other day you told me how proficient you were at doing X. I figured that a senior postdoc such as yourself will be able to do these tasks much quicker and in a more efficient way than the newbies." My lab members were all suddenly sporting evil grins, and the lab manager merely said blandly, "Sounds reasonable enough. Anyone has anything else to say?" Of course, when said in front of the boss and with the support of the lab manager, who also hated Bob, Bob could not protest. Bob was tasked with these 4 tasks until he left us, and we all made sure to liberally use the equipment he was responsible for. 3. This happened about a month ago. I work for an extremely toxic and verbally abusive woman who's taken to singling me out and bullying me since I got hired. She's awful to everyone. 6 people have quit in 3 months I've been there, but she especially hates me for whatever reason. So for context, I work as a dental assistant, and we use a special kit with each patient. They're a pain in the ass to clean. First, they have to be run through an ultrasonic for 10 minutes, then they get rinsed for 30 seconds. Then the whole cassette and each individual instrument has to be inspected under a microscope, scrubbed, and hand-dried. They have to be repacked into the cassette in order, and then wrapped twice. So you can see the entire process takes quite a while, especially if you're only just learning it. The problem is we can't start doing this until after our last patient is done. But the dentist somehow expects it to be dried and wrapped almost immediately, aka she wants everyone to defy the laws of time and space. Well, she finally hired a new girl who was in the sterilization room all day training how to do all this. Even I still struggle with it after 3 months, so it's obviously taking her longer to do everything. She does her best in there, and I help out when I'm not assisting patients. She gets everything mostly wrapped by the end of the day, except the last cassette. And I shut down the rooms, also a long process. Everyone changes out of uniforms, and we're about to head home. Except, of course, this lunatic needs to hit her quota for yelling at me for the day, and finds one more reason to, just because. So she comes yelling over to all 4 of us and singles me out, screaming at me that there can't be anything left unwrapped. It's common practice to leave a few instruments unwrapped at the end of the day at the clinic. You just get them in the morning. She makes me put my stuff down, go back into the sterilization room, wash my hands, put on full PPE, gown, glasses, gloves, mask, and go through the entire cleaning process with this thing. At this point, I'm beyond livid. I wasn't the one who left it there, it doesn't matter that it's there, and I am the only one who takes public transportation, which I've just missed. My next bus isn't until another 30 minutes later. What makes me really snap, though, is when she turns off the lights on me while I'm in there. First of all, super dangerous to be turning off lights on someone handling sharp, bloody instruments. Second, how does she expect me to do this in pitch black? She only turns them on when another girl gets visibly uncomfortable and is like, you know she's still in there, right? She then realizes how awful she's making herself look in front of new employees, and tries putting on her best fake voice telling them they can go home and don't need to wait. At this point, I'm ready to walk out, and then I realize my bus doesn't come for half an hour, and she has the only keys to lock up. She's stuck here until I decide I'm done, which I decide isn't going to be until every one of these instruments is spotless. So for the next 10 minutes, I painstakingly clean every millimeter of these things, make sure not a drop of liquid is on them, and spend longer wrapping this thing than I ever have. I can hear her getting angrier and angrier as I take my sweet time, doing exactly what she asked me to do. She's fuming by the time I'm done. I made it just in time for the next bus, after she had to awkwardly stand outside in the cold with the rest of the staff who refused to leave without me, knowing full well she was the reason everyone's time was being wasted upon her request. But at least we could all rest easy that the cassette got dried. You'll be glad to know, a little while after that, I gave a week's notice. But by Wednesday, she was being so rude to me I emailed in saying I wouldn't be back and asked where to mail my uniform. She spent all morning bitching about me not bagging 4 instruments the night before. Now she's stuck bagging everything herself. 4. My brother, a 20-year-old male, and I, 22 female, worked for a furniture factory last year. We were what they called summer technicians, meaning we were only scheduled to work for 3 or 4 months. He had been working at the factory a couple of weeks before I joined. We worked in different sections on the same department. This department had 5 or so sections. The important ones are press, the saw, edging, and touch-ups. I forget the actual names of what we actually called what I'm calling the press and touch-ups. My brother worked with the press. His section dealt with gluing laminates on blocks of wood. Basically, what his section did was glue the wood-looking fake sheet of laminate that goes on top of tables to make the tables look like they aren't just made of wood chips packed together. His section produced about 800 parts on average during the first shift alone, the shift we worked. After gluing about 12 or so tables, they would be moved to the saws to be cut up into specific table shapes. This section had a lot of backlog because of how fast my brother's section worked. My section was edging. Here one person glued rubber strips around the edge of the table and another trimmed the rubber so that it fit the table, as in, didn't cut into the wood and wasn't too much left on. My position in edging was as the second person. Our department produced about 300 parts on average during first shift. Edging always had the most backlog out of all the sections because of supply issues and the amount of table sheets my brother pushed out. He was the one always pushing his section to work faster because if they maxed out table space, they'd be able to go home early. After trimming the edging, the tables would be given to the next section to undergo inspections. Here, people would touch up small mistakes and scratches, outright reject the table if there was a flaw, and pass them on to be shipped. This section also always had a lot of backlog, but not as much edging since these people also expected the edgers to touch up the tables before we passed them on. I got into many fights over this. Throughout the 3 months I worked there, the edging section was always the section that got the most shit for being slow. It also didn't help that second shift didn't produce as much as they should have been, leaving us first shifters to carry the weight. The day this happened was on my brother's and I's last day there. Miraculously, there was no backlog in edging. The tables we were able to work on came in shipments of 12 or so every other hour. We flew through those. As a result, the people in my section were left doing nothing, cleaning, chatting. Some took an early lunch break, etc. Basically, we were bored and had nothing to do. Also, because we didn't have any tables to edge, the touch-up section behind us didn't have any tables to work on either. That's 2 sections being paid to sit and twiddle their thumbs. I decided to instead go over to my brother's section and help out there if I could. My brother showed me what they were working on, how the machine runs, what to look out for, what they did to prep, everything. He told me I could help with prep, since the section needed experienced people to work with the press. His entire section was cool with me helping out, so we figured we were in the clear. Not even a couple of tables into me helping, the department manager comes over and says, Puppy, why are you over here? You're distracting them. I'm helping them out. There's nothing to do over there. We don't have any tables to edge. Yes, you do. Saw 5 just finished a batch. Stay over in your section and do what you're supposed to do. With that, I said bye to my brother and his section and went over to my machine. Much to no one's surprise, there weren't any tables there. Saw 5 wasn't done with the batch yet. My co-worker working on the machine with me wasn't there also. He was chatting with the ladies who worked in the touch-up section. The DM, seeing that there aren't any tables ready, goes over to Saw 5 and lingers there until he's able to load up the tables and deliver them to my machine. After a couple minutes looking for my co-worker, the edgers were hard to find that day because of the lack of work to do, we get to work on the stack. The batch takes us about half an hour to finish edging. With nothing to do again, my co-worker and I just talked with each other and the other touch-up girls. I even took a half-hour bathroom break just for fun. For about the last 2 hours of my shift, there was no work to be done, and instead of letting me help out other sections, I was paid to sit around on my phone, talk to co-workers, and take an extra lunch break. Before anyone comments that it's a safety concern, I had seen people go from section to section helping people. The job I was going to do to help was separating the table laminates, so I wouldn't have even been near the press. I don't know why that day our DM was all up in arms about me being over in that section. Maybe he thought I was just there to distract people. I don't know, though. 5. Back in 2009, in a German gymnasium, similar to a high school, we had a group act of malicious compliance. Background. During the last 2 years of your studies, you can choose your courses according to your own preferences. While this is super nice for individual development, it means that you often have 1 or 2 lecture slots free, and then again a few more lectures, etc. Basically, your timetable looks like Swiss cheese. To compensate, the students of grade 12 and 13 had their own room to chill out in by tradition. The setting. We were nearing the shift from 9-year to 8-year curriculum, i.e., the next younger students would graduate at the same time as we did. This caused a shortage in capacity in our school, among them that the extra room was taken since it was needed for classes. Inconvenient but understandable, we were told to make use of the seating and available space throughout the school. What we didn't take well was that the cafeteria became too small too. So during lunchtime we regularly would not have sufficient space to sit and eat. The school promised to make amends. But 3 months into the school year, the situation was still the same. One of the deputy headmasters of our school was a real git. He would generally slag off his own colleagues, showed strong favoritism to whoever had the brownest nose, and was generally seen as one of the worst teachers the school offered. We asked him during class one day about the current state of affairs, and told him it's unacceptable with winter coming to not have enough space to eat. The malicious compliance. His answer: I'm afraid there won't be any change soon. You'll just have to cope with it. I've seen you lingering around, sitting on the floor often enough. Seems like you have no problem with that. So why don't you just sit on the floor and eat? There's sufficient space in the hallways. End of November. The floor is not only dirty, but wet with snow, salt, and every other dirt people drag into the building from outside. And it only gets worse over the next months. Something needed to happen, and happen it did. The next day, whenever we had free time in our schedule, we just sat down in the hallways right in front of the teacher's common room, and the office of the head mistress. Our colleagues asked us what we were doing. We told them the story above, and within 1 day we had an occupation of the teacher's common room and office of the head mistress running, taking his advice to just sit on the floor to eat. During lunch hour, that made around 300 students in front of 2 doors. You can imagine how that pissed everyone off. Every teacher who asked was explained that we followed the advice of the git deputy, eating from the floor, whatever space is available, and that we think here is better than lingering in the way of our fellow students. The fallout. Most teachers showed understanding for the action. Some didn't. One got to the point where he stepped on some girl's fingers while cursing about us. That was a very uncomfortable 10 minutes for him until he made his way through to the teacher's room. Tensions were running high. Teachers not getting into their common room that holds printers and other office supplies means lessons start late for everyone. At the 5th day, the headmistress informed us that they had found a solution to the problem, with sufficient space being available, and that it would take effect 2 days later. The deputy headmaster sank even lower in the opinion of the staff, as everyone knew he should have looked after this issue himself and not just done nothing for months. Before that, he was seen as a possible next headmaster. Afterwards, that was off the table. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 164. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, please hit the like button and share the video with a friend or family member. Alright, let's see, no special shoutouts today that I'm aware of, so we'll move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And the question is, and your answer will vary depending on where you live, but would you rather live in a country that gets mostly sun and rain only sometimes, but enough obviously to keep things hydrated, plants and such, or live in a place that gets mostly rain and only sun sometimes, like where I live? I kind of like the sound of rain, but today we actually had thunderstorms, and we're going to get the rest of Monday as well. It sounds like it went from thunderstorms to heavy thunderstorms, so that's exciting. But while I do enjoy the sound of rain, I think I'd rather stay where it's cooler. The idea being it's easier to warm up than cool down. But you may have a different answer. You may live in a place that has lots of heat, and you might love it. And maybe I would too if I had it long enough to adapt to it. But let me know what you think in a comment below. Okay. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.